Well, it's only 3 weeks until my sabbatical begins. It's hard to believe it was over 7 years ago since my previous sabbatical, and our denomination recommends that pastors have sabbaticals once every 7 years for 3 months. And so I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. Sabbatical is all about rest. The month of July, we have July rest. And so I thought I would do a sermon mini-series for 3 weeks all about rest and Sabbath, something the scripture calls Jubilee, and help us be thinking about prepping for that. And so this week, we're going to get started with that. I read a headline that said this: bill that would end Sunday ban on football and baseball passes the Pennsylvania House. What year do you think that headline was published? Any guesses? Bill that would end Sunday ban on football and baseball passes the Pennsylvania House. What do you think? I hear a guess back there? 1960s? Any others? 2024. 1924. It was 2022. The article goes on to report the State House passed a bill Monday, September 19th, 2022, that would repeal a law that makes it illegal to play football or baseball on a Sunday except between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. In other words, the article in the bill was saying that there were no Sunday morning or evening games supposed to be played. Why? What was happening on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings? Church, worship services, that's right. So when do you think the law that they were trying to repeal in 2022 originally went into effect? You're getting closer now to your original guess, Steve. PA Legislature Act number 49 was approved in 1933. It was called the Sunday Baseball and Football Law, and there were fines involved. If a sports team would disobey the law, guess how much the fine was? $10. You got it. $10. And we all know the Phillies and the Eagles have been playing Sunday evenings for decades, right? Well, the Sunday baseball and football law was part of a series of laws in Pennsylvania called the Blue Laws. You may have heard of this before. Blue. Why blue? I did a little research on it, and it suggested there are two options for why these Sunday restriction laws were called blue laws. Number one, it was just related to the use of the word blue for sadness. Didn't say if the law made people sad or if it was intended to cure sadness, but either way, it kind of works. Number two, some people think that the original blue laws coming out of England were printed on blue paper. We don't know. But the intent of the blue laws goes way back to 1676. And they were called the Duke of York Laws. That's pre-William Penn. Does anyone know when William Penn took ownership of the land we call Pennsylvania? 1681. Do you remember what kind of Christian Penn was? A Quaker, right? That's why Pennsylvania is called the Quaker state. Quaker State Oil, heard of that before? It's from Pennsylvania. Quakers were strict about their view of what a good Christian was supposed to do or not do. Quakers believed in hard work. To engage in diversion or enjoyment, they were not so keen on that. And at the time, because of our English heritage, there were not only Quakers in Pennsylvania, there were a lot of Anglicans. And Anglicans like a good party. But guess who was in charge? William Penn and the Quakers. And so Quaker leadership of the state enacted laws banning a whole slew of activities. In 1682, the Quaker-led law code prohibited cards, dice, lotteries, or such enticing and vain and evil sports and games. 11 years later, in 1693, they expanded the law, banning on Saturdays stage plays, masks, revels, bull baits, cockfights, and, believe it or not, bonfires. In other words, living in colonial Pennsylvania, not very fun. But why? What's the purpose of these laws? One scholar writes this: Pennsylvania's blue laws were instituted to give people time to honor the Lord on the Sabbath. Individuals were expected to worship the Creator by attending church and reading the Scriptures. Both work and play were unacceptable forms of behavior on the Lord's Day. 300 years later, in 1978, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court found those blue laws unconstitutional. But guess what? Some of them remain on the books still today. Guess what you can't do on Sunday in Pennsylvania? Some of you know this. Can you go to a car dealership and buy a car? No. That's a blue law. But now at least the Phillies and the Eagles are in the clear. No more $10 fines for their Sunday night games. And for all you hunters, did you hear that Governor Shapiro repealed the Sunday hunting ban? That was just this past week. That was a blue law. The question I'm getting at is this: how did the people who enacted the blue laws believe that those laws help people observe the Sabbath? Well, turn with me to Genesis chapter 2, page 2 in your pew Bibles. Genesis chapter 2, page 2. I'm going to read about the original Sabbath. Genesis chapter 2, page 2. There we read, at the end of the creation story, which is in chapter 1, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." The Sabbath, then, is the seventh day of the week. That's not Sunday. It's Saturday. Technically, from a Jewish cultural perspective, it lasts from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. So the Sabbath is not Sunday. The seventh day of the week has always been Saturday. Sunday is the first day of the week. You see that on basically all your calendars. Interestingly, in this passage, we read that God did what? He blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Why did he do that? It's because he had worked the previous 6 days, and then he rested on that seventh day. And in this act, God declares that rest is a very good thing. Now, given what we believe about God, God doesn't need rest, right? God has unlimited energy, doesn't need to sleep. He could work forever. It would never affect him if he worked every hour of the day, every day of the week, every day of the year, forever. Why? Because he is what we call omnipotent, all-powerful. And yet, God, the omnipotent one, rested. Why? Why didn't he just keep going? God rests as an example to us. He knows that the creation he created doesn't have unlimited energy. We're not omnipotent. We sometimes think we are. How many of you think you can just go and go and go and go and go, right? I felt like that yesterday. I was on a roll, got up in the morning, took my dog on a run, come back in, got breakfast, rested a little bit, put on the non-sweaty shirt, went back out, mowed the grass. You know, it was pretty humid yesterday. That was sweaty shirt number 2. Came back inside, got lunch, rested a little bit, went back outside, started splitting wood, and my body said, enough. I started feeling sick in my stomach, started having one of those migraine headaches where there's a big bright light in front of you. I couldn't keep going. I just came inside, and that was it for the rest of the day. We don't have unlimited energy. We need to rest, and God knows that. He wants us to have that abundant, flourishing life. And one of the ways we experience flourishing is when we are consistently getting good rest. And in the middle of that rest, we have a wonderful opportunity to see God's character, His goodness, the example that He wants us to follow. And so we do well to follow that example by resting. Sabbath, then, is a loving, gracious gesture. It's a gift from God. Because He knows that we need the rest, and He doesn't require us to live in a way that would be impossible for us. Sabbath is God's care for us. And that care shows up in the Exodus account. When God rescued His people Israel out of slavery, and after they had journeyed into the wilderness, things got a little bit intense. Turn with me to Exodus chapter 16. It's page 57 on your pew Bibles, in your pew Bibles. Exodus chapter 16, page 57. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Can you imagine being a working people who are now unable to work? For all your life, you have worked in order to put food on the table. And you've worked hard. It was slavery, actually. It was brutally hard. The Egyptian Pharaoh squeezed every ounce of energy out of the Israelites, always asking for more and more and more, and to do it with less and less. And so if you're a Hebrew enslaved in Egypt, of course you hated it. And you cried out to God for it to stop, and God heard, and He stopped it. But now you're in the wilderness desert. It's just a couple weeks later, maybe a month. And there's no work, and there's no food. But God steps in. Look at verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. And so God steps in when the people are in a desperate situation with no food and no work to do to be able to provide that food, and God says, I will provide. And did you notice how God provides not only new work, but also new food, and He lays a foundation for a new kind of rest? So each day they have work. They're to go out and collect the food that God provides. But it's only supposed to be enough for that day. It's this bread, this manna from heaven. So each day has just a little bit of Sabbath built into it, because they're not to be working all day long in order to hoard up all this bread. Instead, they just work enough for that day. In other words, you're not supposed to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because God also specifies that there is a longer rest period. On the sixth day, he said, on that day you collect double bread, because on the seventh, I'm not going to send any bread. That's your day of rest. So on the sixth day, you collect for the sixth day and for the seventh day. Look at verse 21. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow, he's talking about the seventh day, is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. What a beautiful system of work and rest. But notice, the system depends on God. The people cannot solely depend on themselves and their abilities. They will work, yes, they will do the collecting, but they don't overwork. They depend on what God provides for them, just what they need. Except there's a problem. Some people didn't seem to place their trust in God in this system. Because think about it. If you're used to working hard and putting food on the table by working hard, which was what all they knew in Egypt was hard work, nonstop. When that's your mindset, it can be very difficult to rest. Anybody ever have a problem with just actually kind of getting so used to hard work that you can't rest? Maybe you've been there before. I'm talking about American life now. This is not just an ancient Israelite problem, especially in cultures like our culture here in Lancaster County. We are work-oriented. It's been that way for our county's cultural history. We can have a hard time resting, relaxing, and feeling okay about it. When our workday is done in the evening, we're often thinking about what can we do to make more money? Or what can we do around the house? What can we do? And we feel guilty if we're not using the time according to that societal expectation of production and consumption over and over again. And that's exactly what some of the Israelites do. Look at verse 27. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day. Remember, that was the day they were supposed to not collect anything because there wasn't going to be any food. They went out anyway to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the seventh day. I kind of wonder if that verse should say, so the people were forced to rest on the seventh day. In that Sabbath rest, God says, trust in me. I am faithful. Trust in me. Stop striving. Stop working. God is desperate for the people of Israel to receive this good gift of rest. He knows what they need. He knows what will be good for them. It's in their best interest to rest. Sabbath is a gift. But the people don't trust him to provide. They have this fear that they won't have enough, and that fear wins out. They don't want to receive the gift of rest because of their fear that they need to keep working, keep earning. So there in the wilderness desert, there is no Israelite alive who could remember from hundreds of years before the God of rest. This idea that there's a Sabbath, a whole day off. They had been enslaved in Egypt for so long that hard work every day is all they knew. And yet, what a wonderful gift God gives them. It would have been culturally absolutely topsy-turvy for them to think, I can take a break for a whole day? Well, it's so important that God enshrines the gift of the Sabbath in the teaching of the Ten Commandments. Turn to Exodus chapter 20. It's page 60. It's where we read the Ten Commandments. And in verse 8, it says this, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So for the nation of Israel, the Sabbath was an actual day of the week. It was a 24-hour period. Again, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. And that was part of their covenant relationship with God. We call it the Old Covenant. You and I, however, are not in that agreement. We do not abide by the Old Covenant. We're Christians, and we're bound by the terms of the New Covenant. And the New Covenant does not say that we have to take Friday sundown to Saturday sundown and do no work. Now, a Christian can certainly choose to do that if they want to. Could even be on Sunday. But no Christian should attempt to make a new law suggesting that Sunday is the Sabbath day for Christians. It just simply is not. It's not part of our New Covenant that identifies us as Christians or followers of Jesus. The only reason most churches meet for worship on Sundays is because that's the day of the week that Jesus rose from the dead. And eventually, that practice of Christians having worship services on Sundays became so prevalent, especially in countries that were majority Christian, that it became a day off of work. Some people, interpreting the Bible incorrectly, then declared that Sunday is the new Sabbath. And they tried to make new laws, like the blue laws, to make it easier for people to go to church on Sunday. But there's always been people who have needed to work on Sundays, right? Pastors. I don't ever get a Sunday off. Worship leaders. Law enforcement personnel, medical personnel, we could go on and on. Lots of people work on Sundays. It's not wrong. Instead of making blue laws, what Christians should have done, and what we still strive for today, is to implement the principle of Sabbath in our lives. Not a 24-hour period of rest each week, although that could be a very good thing if a person wants to choose to do that of their own free will. Instead, the principle of Sabbath is radical trust in God. One writer that I read calls it resistance. Sabbath as resistance. Here's what he means. By practicing God's principle of Sabbath, we are resisting the pressure that the world places on us to go, 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 always doing something, multitasking, earning, working, never stopping. One of the things I love about my extended Keim family vacations in Pennsylvania state parks is that often those parks are in cell phone dead zones. No cell service means that for that whole week we are not getting phone calls, we're not getting any alerts, text messages, emails, and we cannot be on social media. On those weeks, I turn my phone off, I put it on a shelf in the cabin, and there it sits. It's glorious. I give my phone a rest, and in turn, I rest from my phone. That's Sabbath. A week of phone Sabbath. A week of no longer being enslaved to the taskmaster that is this constant noise from our phones that says, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, over and over. There's many ways that we can apply the principle of Sabbath in our lives. In fact, Jesus continues this emphasis. And again, for Jesus, it's not a rule, but it's an emphasis. It's the heart of Sabbath. In his Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, he teaches this: no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon, or money. Sabbath is such a radical concept in our world because it resists against our human cultural tendency to depend on money, to depend on what our work will get us, to depend on how valuable we feel when we're working. So often our identity can be found in our work rather than in Christ. This week I met Molly and Colin for dinner. For those of you from Faith Church, you might remember Molly and Colin. Molly was an LBC student, and she preached here at Faith Church a bunch of times over the past year. Well, she and her boyfriend Colin were regular attenders at Faith Church then for the entire year. They were in town, so we met up for dinner on Tuesday night, and we picked out a restaurant that we all liked. Well, a couple hours before we were to meet, I got a text from Molly saying they just looked up the restaurant and it was closed that day. My first thought is, why in the world would a restaurant be closed on a Tuesday evening? Tuesday. As I thought about it further, as I was working on this sermon, I thought, I bet the owners and the employees of that restaurant really appreciate the night off. Some establishments do close on Mondays or Tuesdays because the weekend was so crazy busy. I have a friend who works at Chick-fil-A just down here on Lincoln Highway. He is super grateful that Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. Now, I don't know how much of those businesses deciding to close their doors are because they believe this idea of Sabbath and they want to apply it to their lives. But clearly, whoever makes those decisions knows that by closing their doors, they are foregoing the opportunity to make money. It's one of the reasons why Sabbath is so countercultural. Sabbath is resistance. The prevailing cultural impulse around us is make more money. Feel valuable because you work hard. So work like crazy. Work on your day off. Work on your vacation even. Because of our pastoral role, Michelle and I have really wrestled with this over the years, especially since the onset of the smartphone, texting, being online all the time. When I started at Faith Church, I did not even have a cell phone. 2002. The internet here at church back then was dial-up. I was youth pastor at the time, and the previous pastor and I shared the same dial-up line. If one of us was online and the other person didn't realize it, and we dialed up to check on our email and go on the internet, it would bump the other person offline just like that. But we could go back way further than that. Imagine being a pastor in the days of our evangelical forefathers who literally rode horseback from church to church and town to town. If you needed them for pastoral care, you had to physically go get them. And that's only if they happened to be in your town. You could also write letters to them that they might get a couple weeks later. Now the texts, the emails, the phone calls, etc. are nonstop, right in the joy of my own living room. That's the reality of pastoral ministry in 2025. That's the reality of life in 2025, isn't it? For all of us. It's not just pastors, but all of us are always on call. In my years as pastor, rarely, it has been super rare that I've gone to the hospital at like 1 a.m., middle of the night kind of a deal. Sometimes you think about that as the stereotypical being on call. That's super rare. What is more prevalent is answering the texts, the calls, the emails, the messages all the time. For some of you, your work is like that too. Really, for all of us, life is like that too. Because of our phones and the internet. How then do we truly apply Sabbath in our ultra-connected world? For one, we can turn the devices off. So I want you to try it. Get them out right now. Everybody, get out your phone. Turn it off. Does it feel a little scary? Does it feel a little nerve-wracking? For some of you, Billy's like, no. Some of you, this is not scary at all. I do it all the time. But for some of you, you never turn it off. Please, get it out right now and turn it off. I want us all to feel just the little twinge of whether it's awkwardness or fear or maybe freedom, that we can turn them off. Let's feel what it's like to be uncontactable, unnotifiable, just for the rest of this worship service. Go ahead, get it out. I know some of you haven't done it yet. Turn it off. It's 9:59, you only got 15 more minutes. How many of you actually turn your devices off from time to time? Or do you keep them on all night long? I turn mine off every night before I go to bed. Yes, that means you cannot contact me in the middle of the night by my phone, unless the only way I'm contactable in the middle of the night is you're going to have to come to my house. I don't mean to be a jerk about that. 99.9% of situations can wait. And the act of turning my phone off at night has done two things at least. One, I sleep better, knowing I don't need to worry about that thing. Number two, it helps me break the connection to that phone. I have it with me all day long. It's not healthy. We need to break the connection to our phones. But practicing Sabbath is much more than just turning your phone off regularly. Jesus also says this in Matthew 11. If you want to turn there, you can turn. It's to page 792. Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. Page 792. Jesus says this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Think about the confidence that Jesus wants to give us. I think we can often lack confidence in our trust in Jesus. We can turn off our phone, but then we worry like crazy about what we're missing out. We can not work on Sunday, but we can be very unconfident, thinking I should be making more money. I need to be beefing up that retirement account. I think about these things too. And to that lack of confidence, Jesus says, trust in me. Take my yoke upon you. I'm faithful. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, who was the guy that talked about Sabbath as resistance, he says here in this passage, Jesus could be talking about the weariness of the Roman taxation system that meant that people had to work nonstop to make ends meet. Does that sound familiar? Or Jesus could be talking about the Jewish religious system that was filled with endless rules to follow, making it seem impossible for most people to think that God was smiling over them. Maybe that sounds familiar. We got to work. We got to be good all the time. Jesus says, come to me and rest from that. How many of you have felt that pressure of paying off debt, paying the bills, paying for retirement, health insurance? Life is crazy expensive in Lancaster. Here at the church, we recently got an email from a person in a different part of the state of Pennsylvania. They had been to Lancaster. They stayed at the Cartoon Network Hotel and said, we loved it here. Lancaster was really, really great. And in fact, my doctor said there's good hospitals nearby and I have a health condition. We also have a personal family problem. We need to get out of our town. We want to move to Lancaster. We need a 5-bedroom house, and we have about $1,000 a month for that. I said, Lancaster? No. It's not happening. I said, you might want to look at Lebanon County or another. Not Lancaster. It's expensive here. And we get frustrated with the finances of it all. We can also feel tired about striving to be a so-called good Christian in a highly spiritualistic religious culture, which is also Lancaster County. To that frustration, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy. My burden's light. I'll give you rest. Jesus is our source of true rest. When we spend time with him and rest in him. One way we do that is through contemplative prayer, where we physically sit with Jesus, listening for him through his Spirit. We're so accustomed to noise, having sound fill the air around us. We do well to follow Jesus' example. He was quick to get away, to be by himself, to spend time with his Father, to get away from the crowds and get away from the noise. Now, we can take action to reduce noise in our lives. It's more important that we spend time with Jesus, contemplating who he is. How does he think? How does he act? What does his heart beat for? And asking the Spirit to help us rest in him so that we can think and live more like him. It all comes back to our hearts. Jesus knows what is best for our hearts is to rest in him and trust in him. That practice, that habit of spending time with Jesus is applying Sabbath principles to our lives. It's not making a new law. It's not saying that you have to do it for 30 minutes every single day or you're a bad Christian. It's not that at all. But we can try to do it regularly. Could be turning off the noise in the car when you're driving. Could be at night before bed. Could be both. Could be other times throughout the day of quiet. One small way I try to do this is when I'm running. I choose not to listen to music or podcasts when I'm running. Instead, I run, just listen to the world around me, thinking, sometimes praying. Sometimes my mind's all over the place, if I'm honest. But it's that intention to sit with Jesus, take his yoke upon us, and rest in him. So how will you apply Sabbath to your life? Do you apply Sabbath on a regular basis? What could it look like to be committed more to resting in him? He wants to give us rest. It's a gift. Sabbath is a wonderful gift. And so